Thank you, Rich. Thank you, Jessica. Let me take the opportunity before I start to actually thank all my co-authors who did an absolutely superb job in pulling together the volume this year. I said this yesterday, that this volume was easier to produce than most others. And I attributed that in part to the fact that we have either economists or political economists writing their chapters. They brought to their writing a discipline that some of us in the more softer social sciences often lack. And so it became very easy to pull together this volume. And I say that as a tribute because this volume was also very difficult to do in an intellectual sense, because it was not simply a story of what's happening in the arena of economics or in the arena of the global economic system. But the challenge was to analyze the issues involved in that arena, but then tease from that consequences for politics, which is often not self-evident and clear. And I will leave you all to judge whether we've satisfactorily managed to do that, but I'm very satisfied with the way the book has come out. What we're going to do this afternoon is we are going to break into a series of panels so that we have our contributors who have provided particularly regional chapters a chance to come out and give you their sense of how the economic crisis has affected different quadrants of the Asia Pacific. And we are going to start, Roger Kubarich and myself, looking at the issues relating to the United States. I will give you a brief synopsis, if I can, within 10 minutes of what my chapter covers, and then I will leave it to Roger, and then we'll take questions and open a discussion before we then break and have the next panel. What my chapter tried to do was to engage two very large questions. The first is, does the economic crisis fundamentally damage capitalism as a social organization? And I think it was an important question because in the immediate aftermath of the crisis, there were many voices that basically got up there and said, you know, this is the end of the free market system. It's the end of capitalism. We can't run the way the world, the way it has been run. And looking at it now in retrospect, I think our judgments are much more measured. And my conclusions are much more optimistic than they might have been, say, 6 months ago. And the bullet headline there is that capitalism is an enormously flexible system. We've seen very conspicuous weaknesses in the way it has been organized thus far, particularly in the systems of regulation. And Roger Kubarich has written a superb chapter pointing out those weaknesses, particularly in the US context. But the very nature of the system is such that it allows for infinite mutation. And it responds well to market signals. And so I'm much more optimistic that capitalism as a system of social organization will still continue to remain the best system. And the discussion in the book looks at a whole range of questions, particularly relating to, is there an Asian model of capitalism which is superior to ours, which became a debate, again, in the aftermath of the financial crisis. The whole question of whether we can regulate our way to a new form of economic organization that precludes the possibility of bubbles. That is, whether you can actually have economic trajectories which permit bubble-free growth. I'm more pessimistic about that. I think bubbles, in some sense, are endemic to free market systems, and I try and analyze why that is the case. But my bottom line is that this system will survive. It will move in the direction of greater regulation, hopefully better regulation. And the pendulum, at least in the foreseeable future, will be in the direction of regulation, but don't, again, imagine that that is some sort of a permanent terminus. The pendulum will swing back, as it has in this country over the last 30 years. And it is that dynamism between the pendulum swinging in the direction of greater regulation versus less that will define, in a sense, the political economy and the survival of capitalism over the next several decades. I want to talk more about the second part of my chapter, which looks at the impact of the crisis on the future of American economic and geopolitical power. And this was a difficult section to engage because we don't know how this crisis is going to come out. There is a certain fragility to the bounce back, if there is a bounce back at all. But I thought at least conceptually we need to think about this issue in a serious way. And so what I did was I broke it up into 3 time periods and tried to understand what are the issues at stake in each of the key time periods. And so there is a near term, which I look at, which is 3 to 5 years, a medium term, which is 5 to 15 years, and then a longer term, which is beyond the 15-year period. And for the near term, the basic argument I make is that whether this economic crisis will have lasting impact on US power will really depend on the character and the length of the recession in the United States and in each of its major partners. And you can think of 2 kind of bookends. One bookend is where the United States essentially is confronted with a U-shaped recession. And China, for example, to just pick a country, experiences a V-shaped recession. That is, they come back pretty quickly. My view is that even if you get a scenario of this kind, the impact in US power in the near term will actually be quite modest. If you take a worst case where the US is faced with either a W-shaped recession or an L-shaped recession, and China has a V-shaped recession, then obviously that is a far more difficult situation for the United States to manage. Because the kinds of things that we have taken for granted at the moment, that our biggest challenges are in the realm of soft power, et cetera, will have to be revisited. But in the near term, my conclusions are more optimistic because I argue that the differential of power that the United States enjoys vis-a-vis the rest of the states in the international system is still so great that it would be hard to imagine fundamental geopolitical transformations. So for the next 3 to 5 years, we are likely to see more or less a continuation of the present trends. Now, China's soft power, the kind of suspicion about the success of US capitalism, all these will remain issues. But I don't see any fundamental changes. I don't see a big geopolitical shift either in China's direction or, for that matter, in the direction of any other Asian state. So the status quo will hold. When one looks at the medium term, which is essentially my 5 to 15-year period, I see that period as being the period of greatest risks. And there are 2 big economic issues that the United States will have to engage and engage successfully if we have to maintain our current advantages. And the first big issue that we will have to engage in this medium-term period is whether we can successfully pay the price for the stimulus and all the things that we have done to rescue the economy in the last 3 years. Can we, in a sense, construct a non-inflationary exit from the massive price that we've had to pay to deleverage the system? If we can do that successfully and do all the other things that Roger has suggested in his chapter, then I think we obviously are going to be in a much better position than if we are not able to do this successfully. The second big economic question, which again is going to come back in a serious way in this medium-term period, is the whole question of global balances. We have sustained a certain trajectory for the last 20 to 30 years. And that trajectory is essentially US consumption providing the motor for the global economy. But it's consumption that essentially has been underwritten by capital inflows from other countries which have much higher savings rates than ourselves. And I argue in the chapter that this reality of global imbalances in fact constitutes the permissive cause of the crisis. The efficient cause of the crisis, to use old Aristotelian distinctions, is still our failures at regulation, choices that we made within this country. There's no getting away from that. But this question of global imbalances, I think is an issue that will come back and that we will have to somehow address. And it's going to be hard, because the exit from the issue of the challenges of global imbalances will require us to find ways to steadily depreciate the dollar while continuing to reduce our consumption, increase our spending. And all our other trading partners have to do just the reverse. If you're supposed to get an equilibrium, exit. This is going to be hard to do in my judgment, because both sides, the United States and its trading partners, actually benefit from the current factors that lead to the imbalances. The Asian states do want to save more for their own self-interested reasons. The United States is happy to overconsume for reasons that I don't need to describe. And so breaking out of this trap is going to take work. And it's not easy to do. Now, there are implications for politics. If we don't get this right, the future of US economic strength and its primacy will immediately become issues that will begin to start affecting the alliance calculations of many of our partners. That is, they will have to re-examine the question of whether US hegemony will be durable enough and long-lived enough to be able to provide it the protections that today they take for granted. And therefore, that will have an impact on the future universe that we have to confront. And then there is a longer-term future, which is beyond 15 years, which I will very quickly summarize by saying, if we find the fix to the medium-term problems, the long-term future is actually very good, because the US has enormous advantages as a society, where it comes to technical innovation, where it comes to sustaining labor force growth, and where it comes to capital accumulation, assuming it can fix these problems in the medium term. And so I'm much more optimistic about the long term if we can get this middling period right. Of course, there is one big question that hangs over all of this, and that is, do we have the capacity to make decisions at a political level which are coherent enough and smart enough to get us from here to there? And that is still an open question in my mind. So with that, I will divest myself and ask Robert Kubaj to give us a brief preview of his chapter.